Word of humanity's success against the Devourers spread quickly through the remaining Council forces across the Vega system. Admiral Nextai, of the Centaurian Defense Fleet, made direct contact with the Iron Phoenix, his voice carrying desperate hope mixed with disbelief. He had commanded warships for over 2 centuries, but had never seen anything like what the human vessel had just accomplished. The Admiral explained his terrible situation to Captain Kim Taeho. Over the past week, his defense fleet had been systematically destroyed by the organic enemy ships. He had started with 40 of the most advanced warships in Centaurian space, but now only 4 remained functional. The survivors were barely holding position around a massive convoy of civilian refugee ships that carried millions of innocent lives. Captain Taeho responded immediately, ordering maximum speed toward Admiral Nextai's coordinates. The Iron Phoenix accelerated through space, while Lieutenant Commander Lee Ji-woo began coordinating with the surviving Council tactical officers. She shared detailed information about humanity's kinetic weapons and explained why they were so effective against the Devourers. The key to fighting these organic enemies was completely avoiding energy weapons of any kind. The creatures had evolved specifically to counter plasma cannons, photon torpedoes, and particle beams by absorbing their energy and converting it to biological power, but they had no defense against solid projectiles that used pure kinetic force to cause damage. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho worked frantically in the weapons bay to prepare additional armaments for the coming battle. The main railguns were incredibly powerful, but they could only target one enemy at a time and needed several seconds to reload between shots. He began modifying some of the secondary systems to create rapid-fire kinetic weapons using spare parts and creative engineering. Young-ho constructed what were essentially giant machine guns that could fire tungsten fragments at high velocity. These weapons would fill space with metal projectiles, making it impossible for enemy fighters to approach without taking damage. The fragments were small, but moved fast enough to punch through organic hull material. When the Iron Phoenix reached Admiral Nextai's position, the scene was desperate beyond description. 3 enormous Devourer capital ships, each larger than any vessel in the Council database, were slowly destroying the remaining Centaurian warships. Swarms of organic fighters buzzed around the refugee convoy like hungry insects seeking prey. The Admiral's flagship was heavily damaged with multiple hull breaches and failing life support systems. His crew had been fighting continuously for days without rest, and their energy weapons were completely useless against enemies that grew stronger from every attack. The situation looked hopeless until the human warship arrived. Captain Taeho immediately ordered his crew to battle stations as the Iron Phoenix entered the combat zone at maximum speed. The ship's railguns targeted the largest Devourer vessel and fired a full salvo of tungsten rounds. The kinetic projectiles struck the organic hull with tremendous force, creating massive wounds that spurted biological fluids into space. The Devourer ship writhed in apparent agony as the tungsten rounds tore through its internal organs. The creature tried to heal the damage, but kinetic wounds could not be repaired, like energy burns. Within minutes, the massive vessel broke apart and died, its organic components scattering through the void, like pieces of torn flesh. The 2 remaining enemy capital ships immediately turned their attention to this new threat that had killed their companions so efficiently. Their hull patterns shifted to what appeared to be aggressive configurations as they moved to attack the Iron Phoenix. The organic surfaces rippled with dark energy as the creatures prepared for battle, but Captain Taeho had carefully studied the recordings from their first encounter with the Devourers. He understood their behavioral patterns and knew how to exploit their weaknesses. The human warship began evasive maneuvers, while Lieutenant Commander Ji-woo coordinated defensive fire from the newly modified kinetic weapons. The smaller organic fighters that had been harassing the refugee convoy now swarmed toward the Iron Phoenix, seeking to overwhelm the human ship with sheer numbers. But they flew directly into clouds of tungsten fragments that shredded their organic hulls like tissue paper. The creatures had no armor that could stop solid metal moving at such extreme velocity. Chief Engineer Young-ho monitored the weapon systems as they fired continuously, filling space with deadly metal projectiles. The rapid-fire kinetic guns worked exactly as he had hoped, creating a defensive barrier that no organic enemy could penetrate. The Devourer fighters died by the hundreds as they tried unsuccessfully to approach. The two remaining capital ships attempted to use their size advantage to crush the Iron Phoenix, but Captain Tejo was ready for this tactic. The human warship was much smaller and more maneuverable than the massive, organic vessels. It could dodge their attacks while targeting specific weak points with precision. Railgun Fire Lieutenant Commander Ji Woo had identified the most vulnerable areas on the Devourer ships by analyzing their internal structure. The organic vessels had central nerve clusters that controlled their movement and healing abilities. If these areas could be damaged, the creatures would become helpless and eventually die from their wounds. The battle continued for over an hour as the Iron Phoenix systematically destroyed both remaining enemy capital ships. The tungsten rounds punched through organic armor and damaged vital internal systems that could not be repaired. The Devourer vessels tried desperately to absorb energy for healing, but the human ship used only kinetic weapons. Admiral Nextai watched in amazement as the human warship accomplished what his entire fleet could not do. The same enemy that had seemed unstoppable and invincible was being methodically destroyed by weapons that the Council had always considered primitive and outdated. It was a lesson in the dangers of technological arrogance. When the last Devourer ship finally died, the battlefield fell silent, except for the grateful transmissions from surviving Council vessels. Admiral Nextai personally thanked Captain Tejo for saving millions of civilian lives and proving that humanity deserved respect as equals rather than dismissal as primitives. The victory was broadcast to every Council ship in the system as word spread about the effectiveness of human kinetic weapons. Other alien commanders began requesting assistance from Earth forces, realizing that their energy-based arsenal was useless against this organic enemy. The same species they had ignored for decades was now their only hope for survival. Chief Engineer Young-ho began sharing technical specifications with alien engineers who wanted to retrofit their ships with kinetic weapons. The humans freely gave away their military secrets because they understood that defeating the Devourers required cooperation between all species, regardless of past prejudices or political differences. Captain Tejo realized that this battle had changed everything. The galaxy would never again dismiss humanity as too primitive to matter. Human weapons technology had proven superior to advanced alien systems when facing an enemy that had adapted specifically to counter conventional warfare. Sometimes being different was exactly what the situation required. Captain Kim Taiho walked slowly across the bridge of his warship Iron Phoenix. His boots made soft sounds on the metal floor as he moved toward the big window that showed space. The stars looked like tiny white dots against the black sky, and they moved past the ship very fast as it traveled through space. The Iron Phoenix was the biggest and newest warship that Earth had ever built. It took 20 years for human engineers to design and construct this massive ship. The hull was made from the strongest metals humans could find and forge together. Steel and titanium were mixed in special ways to make armor that could protect against almost any attack. The ship was so large that it needed 200 crew members to operate all its systems properly. Earth had been alone in space for many decades. The Galactic Council was a group of alien species that controlled most of the galaxy. They had visited Earth long ago, but decided that humans were too simple and primitive to join their group. The aliens had advanced technology like energy shields and plasma weapons, while humans still used metal and gunpowder. The Council thought this made humans worthless as allies or members. Now everything had changed in a very strange way. A message had come from the Council asking for help. This was the first time they had contacted Earth in over 30 years. The message was short and urgent. They needed every warship available, even primitive human ones, to help fight some terrible enemy that was destroying their fleets. Commander Park Min-ho had brought the message to Captain Taiho. Personally, Park was Earth's military officer who dealt with alien communications. He looked worried as he explained what the Council had said in their transmission. 3 of their best battle groups had been completely destroyed by an unknown enemy. The aliens were scared, which was very unusual because they had always acted superior and confident. Lieutenant Commander Lee Ji-woo stood at her station studying star maps and tactical displays. She was the second in command of the Iron Phoenix and one of the smartest officers in Earth's military. She had graduated at the top of her class from the Luna Military Academy, which was built on Earth's moon. Jiwoo was expert at planning battles and understanding how to fight enemies effectively. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho was in the engine room checking all the ship's weapon systems. The Iron Phoenix carried experimental weapons that had never been tested in real combat. Human engineers had decided to focus on kinetic weapons instead of energy ones. Kinetic weapons used physical force to destroy targets instead of heat or electricity. The main guns were called rail guns, and they could fire metal projectiles at incredible speeds. Other species in the galaxy used plasma cannons and photon torpedoes, which created energy blasts that could melt through most materials. But humans had taken a different approach because they could not match alien energy technology. Instead, they made weapons that fired solid metal rounds made of tungsten, which was one of the hardest metals known. The tungsten bullets were designed to punch through any armor by using pure speed and mass. Council had always laughed at human projectile weapons, calling them outdated and primitive, but Captain Taiho had read reports that suggested kinetic weapons might have advantages that energy weapons did not. The metal bullets could not be stopped by energy shields, and they carried tremendous force when fired at high velocity. Maybe the aliens would not be laughing anymore. As the Iron Phoenix approached the Vega system where the Council fleet was located, the crew prepared for whatever they might encounter. The distress signals from alien ships had become more desperate over the past few days. The messages described an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat using conventional weapons. Even the most experienced alien commanders were retreating in panic. The ship's sensors detected massive debris fields floating in space where Council warships used to patrol. Pieces of destroyed alien vessels drifted slowly through the dark void like metal graveyards. Captain Taiho ordered all crew members to battle stations as they moved deeper into the system. The enemy that had terrified the galaxy's strongest military forces was somewhere nearby. Taiho thought about how strange it was that Earth had been called to help. After decades of being ignored and dismissed as too primitive, humans were suddenly needed by the same aliens who had rejected them. The Council's arrogance had kept them from working with humans for so long. Now their pride might cost them everything if this unknown enemy could not be stopped. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, checking weapons, loading ammunition, and scanning space for any signs of hostile ships. Everyone knew this mission would be dangerous, but they also felt excited about the chance to prove that humans belonged in the galaxy. Earth had been isolated for too long, and now they could show what human engineering and determination could accomplish. Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo reported that all tactical systems were ready for combat. The ship's armor was designed to absorb impacts rather than deflect them like alien energy shields. The multiple layers of metal plating could take tremendous punishment before breaking through to damage internal systems. This was another way human technology was different from what other species used. Chief Engineer Young-ho confirmed that the railgun systems were fully operational and loaded with tungsten ammunition. Each projectile weighed several kilograms and would be fired at speeds approaching a significant fraction of light speed. When these metal rounds hit their targets, the kinetic energy would be converted to destructive force that could tear apart even the largest enemy ships. Captain Taiho stood at the center of the bridge, watching the tactical displays as they showed the current state of the battle zone. Multiple Council ships were scattered across the system, many of them damaged and barely functional. Their energy weapons had apparently been useless against whatever enemy they had encountered. The aliens were desperate and afraid, which was something humans had never seen before. The Iron Phoenix was about to enter the most dangerous region of space that any human ship had ever visited. They were going to face an enemy that had defeated the galaxy's most advanced military forces, using weapons and tactics that had never been tested in real combat. But Taiho felt confident that human engineering and creativity would find a way to succeed where alien technology had failed. The crew of the Iron Phoenix was ready to show the galaxy that being called primitive was not always an insult. Sometimes, the oldest and simplest approaches to problems were exactly what was needed to solve them. The aliens were about to learn that humans had not survived and thrived on Earth by giving up when things looked impossible. The enemy ships appeared on the Iron Phoenix sensors like nightmares made real. Captain Kim Taiho stared at the display screens, showing vessels that looked nothing like the clean metal designs used by Council species. These ships seemed alive somehow, with surfaces that moved and rippled like skin. The hulls appeared to be made of organic material that pulsed with dark energy. The aliens called themselves the Devourers, and their technology was completely different from anything in the Galactic. Databases instead of metal and circuits. Their ships were grown rather than built. The organic vessels could heal damage automatically, and they seemed to feed on energy attacks, making them stronger with each blast from conventional weapons. Lieutenant Commander Lee Jiwoo studied the tactical readings with growing excitement instead of fear. While other officers looked worried about facing such strange enemies, she saw opportunity in the data. The Council fleets had been using their standard plasma weapons and photon torpedoes. But these energy attacks were exactly what the Devourers wanted to absorb. The few surviving Council ships were scattered across the battle zone, sending panicked messages about unstoppable demons that could not be killed. Their weapons were useless against enemies that grew stronger from every attack. The alien commanders who had seemed so confident and superior were now begging for help from anyone who would listen. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho reported from the weapons bay that all railgun systems were loaded and ready to fire. The tungsten rounds had been designed to penetrate any known armor in the galaxy, using pure kinetic force instead of energy. The metal projectiles could not be absorbed or redirected, like plasma bolts, because they were solid matter moving at tremendous speed. Captain Taiho watched as the first Devourer ship moved toward the Iron Phoenix. The organic vessel was 3 times larger than the human warship, and its surface was covered with what looked like mouths and eyes. The creature ship seemed confident as it approached, probably expecting another energy attack that it could easily consume and convert to power. The bridge crew held their breath as Taiho gave the order to open fire. The main railguns discharged with tremendous force that shook the entire ship. Tungsten rounds screamed through space at speeds that made them invisible to the naked eye. The Devourer vessel made no attempt to dodge because it was used to absorbing energy attacks that moved much slower. What happened next shocked everyone on both sides. The kinetic rounds tore through the organic hull like it was made of paper. The tungsten projectiles punched clean through the creature ship, creating massive holes that spurted strange fluids into space. The Devourer vessel writhed and twisted as if in terrible pain before breaking apart and dying in the void. For the first time in months, the scattered Council forces heard something other than screams and defeat over their communication channels. Human voices reported a successful kill against an enemy that had seemed completely invincible. The Iron Phoenix had destroyed a Devourer ship in seconds, using weapons that the aliens had always dismissed as primitive. Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo immediately began analyzing the attack data to understand exactly why the kinetic weapons had been so effective. The Devourers had evolved to counter energy-based warfare by absorbing and redirecting plasma and photon attacks, but they had never encountered pure physical force on the scale that human railguns could deliver. The organic ships were designed to heal from energy damage, but solid tungsten rounds moving at extreme velocity created wounds that could not be repaired. The kinetic energy was converted to heat and shock waves inside the creature's body, causing massive internal damage that no biological system could survive. Chief Engineer Young-ho started preparing the secondary weapons systems for rapid-fire engagement. While the main railguns were devastatingly effective, they needed time to reload between shots. The ship also carried smaller kinetic weapons that could spray tungsten fragments at high speed, like giant machine guns. More Devourer ships began approaching the Iron Phoenix as word of their companion's death spread through the organic network. These creatures communicated through some form of biological connection that allowed them to share information. Instantly, they were curious about this new enemy that had killed one of their kind so easily. Captain Taiho ordered evasive maneuvers as 3 more enemy vessels surrounded his ship. The Devourers had changed their approach and were now moving more carefully instead of charging straight ahead. They had learned that these new weapons were dangerous, but they did not yet understand how to defend against them. The human crew worked with practiced efficiency as they engaged multiple targets simultaneously. The railguns fired in sequence, sending tungsten rounds into the organic hulls of each enemy ship. The results were the same every time, with the Devourer vessels taking massive damage from weapons they could not absorb or counter. Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo coordinated the point defense systems as smaller organic fighters launched from the dying capital ships. These creatures were fast and agile, but they had the same weakness as their larger cousins. The kinetic weapons filled space with metal, fragments that shredded the organic fighters like leaves in a storm. Within 30 minutes, the immediate area around the Iron Phoenix was clear of enemy vessels. Pieces of destroyed Devourer ships floated through space, leaking strange biological fluids that glowed with fading energy. The human warship had accomplished in half an hour what entire Council battle groups could not do in weeks of fighting. The surviving alien commanders sent grateful messages to Captain Taiho, thanking him for saving their ships and crews. These were the same beings who had dismissed humanity as too primitive to join galactic civilization. Now they were praising human weapons technology and asking for assistance against the Devourer threat. Admiral Nexthai of the Centaurian Defense Fleet contacted the Iron Phoenix directly. His voice showed amazement and relief as he described losing 90% of his ships to enemies that seemed impossible to kill. The Admiral had thought his remaining forces were doomed until the humans arrived with their kinetic weapons. Captain Taiho realized that humanity had discovered something incredibly important. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had become so focused on energy weapons that they had forgotten about the power of simple kinetic force. Sometimes the oldest solutions were exactly what new problems needed. The crew of the Iron Phoenix felt proud as they watched the tactical displays clear of enemy contacts. They had proven that human engineering could succeed where alien technology had failed. The same weapons that the Council had mocked as outdated were now the key to saving galactic civilization from destruction. News of the victory began spreading through the surviving Council ships as commanders shared tactical data about the human attack. The aliens were amazed to learn that simple metal projectiles could be so effective against enemies that absorbed energy weapons. The Devourers had never encountered kinetic warfare before and had no defenses against it. News of humanity's victories reached the Galactic Council's emergency headquarters on Proxima Station. Within hours of the battle, communication systems that had been carrying only desperate pleas for help suddenly buzzed with reports of successful attacks against the previously unstoppable Devourers. The same Council members who had dismissed Earth as too primitive were now desperately requesting human assistance. Fleet Admiral Kang Sung-jin sat in his command center on Earth reading urgent messages from species that had never bothered to acknowledge humanity's existence. The Draconian Empire wanted immediate military assistance. The Centaurian Collective was offering trade agreements in exchange for weapon technology. Even the proud hegemony had swallowed their arrogance to ask for help from the humans they had always ignored. Back on the Iron Phoenix, Captain Kim Taeho found himself coordinating a rapidly growing fleet of human vessels. The Earth Defense Force had immediately dispatched every available warship to the Vega system, each one equipped with kinetic weapons based on the Iron Phoenix's successful design. New ships arrived daily with names like Steel Hammer, Tungsten Rain, and Kinetic Storm. The human crews were eager to prove their worth to the galaxy after decades of isolation and dismissal. They had trained for years wondering if they would ever get the chance to show what Earth's military could accomplish. Now they were being called the galaxy's saviors, and they intended to live up to that reputation. Lieutenant Commander Lee Jiwoo had been promoted to Fleet Tactical Coordinator, working directly with alien military leaders who had previously considered humans beneath their notice. Her strategies, based on human military doctrine dating back centuries, were proving devastatingly effective against an enemy that had adapted only to energy-based warfare. The key insight was that the Devourers had never encountered opponents who relied primarily on kinetic weapons. Their entire evolutionary strategy was built around absorbing and redirecting energy attacks, but they were completely vulnerable to solid projectiles moving at high velocity. Human railguns and mass drivers were the perfect counter to their biological defenses. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho led teams of human technicians who began retrofitting surviving Council ships with kinetic weapon systems. The work was challenging because alien vessels were designed around energy weapon requirements. But human engineering creativity found ways to install railgun systems even on ships that were never meant to carry them. The alien crews were amazed by humanity's willingness to share their military advantages freely. Most species in the galaxy guarded their weapon technology, jealously using it as leverage for political and economic advantage. But humans gave away their secrets to anyone who wanted to fight the Devourers, regardless of past relationships or future obligations. Species that had fought each other for millennia found themselves working together under human leadership. The Draconian Empire and Centaurian Collective had been bitter enemies for over 1,000 years, but now their ships fought side by side using human weapons and tactics. The common threat had united the galaxy in ways that diplomacy never could. The Devourers, meanwhile, began showing signs of confusion and retreat for the first time since their invasion started. Their ships, which had always pressed forward with relentless aggression, were now seen fleeing from combat when they encountered forces equipped with kinetic weapons. The organic creatures had never experienced systematic defeat before. Captain Taiho studied intelligence reports about Devourer behavior patterns, noting significant changes in their tactical approach. The enemy was adapting to the new threat, but their biological evolution was much slower than human technological innovation. Every day brought new human ships with improved weapons, while the Devourers remained vulnerable to kinetic attack. The psychological impact on both sides was enormous. Council forces that had been demoralized by months of defeats suddenly found hope and confidence returning as they achieved victory after victory using human weapons. The aliens began to see humans not as primitive newcomers, but as the galaxy's most innovative military thinkers. Admiral Nexthai became one of the strongest advocates for human leadership in the combined fleet. He had witnessed firsthand how quickly human tactics could turn a hopeless situation into decisive victory. His reports to the Council emphasized that humanity's unconventional approach to warfare was exactly what the galaxy needed. The tide of battle shifted decisively as more human ships joined the fight, and existing vessels were retrofitted with kinetic weapons. Devourer fleets that had seemed unstoppable were systematically destroyed by tungsten rounds fired at tremendous velocity. The organic ships could heal from energy damage, but kinetic wounds were permanent and fatal. Lieutenant Commander Jiwoo developed new tactical doctrines that maximized the effectiveness of mixed human and alien fleets human ships would provide. The primary firepower, while alien vessels used their superior speed and sensors for reconnaissance and support, the combination proved incredibly effective against confused and retreating enemies. Chief Engineer Young Ho worked around the clock to improve human weapon systems and help alien engineers understand kinetic warfare principles. The technical knowledge sharing went both directions, as humans learned about alien sensor technology and power systems, while teaching projectile ballistics and metallurgy to species with centuries more technological development. Captain Taiho realized that humanity had stumbled onto something unprecedented in galactic history. They were not only saving civilization from a seemingly unstoppable threat, but also demonstrating that their supposedly primitive approach to warfare was actually highly advanced in ways the Council had never considered. The galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations had forgotten that sometimes the simplest solutions were also the most effective. Energy weapons were certainly impressive, but they were not always the best choice for every situation. Human kinetic weapons proved that technological advancement did not always mean moving toward more complex systems. Fleet Admiral Sung Jin began planning the next phase of their campaign, as reports came in about Devourer movements in other star systems. It was not enough to simply drive the organic invaders back from Council territory. They needed to find the source of the invasion and eliminate it permanently before the creatures could evolve new defenses. The Iron Phoenix would lead the final assault into unexplored space where the Devourers had originated. Captain Taiho and his crew had started this war as outcasts representing a species the galaxy considered too primitive to matter. Now they would finish it as the leaders of the largest military coalition in recorded history. Deep space reconnaissance missions revealed the location of the Devourers' main staging area in an uncharted system far beyond the galactic rim. Long-range sensors showed massive organic structures floating in the dark void, like enormous space-borne wombs that pulsed with malevolent biological energy. These living factories were producing new ships and creatures at an alarming rate. Captain Kim Taiho studied the intelligence reports with growing concern. The enemy home system contained hundreds of Devourer vessels ranging from small fighters to massive capital ships larger than anything previously encountered. The organic fleet was massing for what appeared to be a final devastating assault on civilized space fleet. Admiral Kang Sung-jin arrived personally aboard Earth's newest and most powerful warship, the Earth's Fury, to oversee the final battle. The massive dreadnought represented the pinnacle of human military engineering with experimental weapons that pushed kinetic warfare technology to its absolute limits. The ship carried mass drivers capable of accelerating asteroids to near light speed. The combined fleet, now under Captain Taiho's command, was the largest military force ever assembled in galactic history. Human warships formed the core of the armada, but they were joined by retrofitted vessels from dozens of council species. The Centaurians had contributed their fastest scout ships, while the hegemony provided massive carriers loaded with fighters. Even the proud Draconian Empire had submitted their most powerful battleships to human tactical command. Species that had never cooperated before were now working together under the leadership of the same humans they had dismissed as primitive just months earlier. The threat of complete extinction had finally united the galaxy. Lieutenant Commander Lee Ji-woo had spent weeks developing a comprehensive battle plan that played to each species' strengths while maintaining the crucial human kinetic weapon advantage. The faster alien ships would eliminate Devourer scouts and fighters, while the heavy human warships focused on destroying the organic production facilities. Everything depended on eliminating the source of new enemies before the combined fleet could be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The organic factories were producing Devourer ships faster than they could be destroyed in conventional battle. The only way to win was to strike at the heart of their reproduction system and shut it down permanently. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho made final preparations on humanity's most secret weapon, hidden deep in the Earth's Fury cargo bay. A massive kinetic impactor, essentially a tungsten asteroid equipped with its own propulsion system, had been designed specifically for this mission. If they could deliver it to the largest organic structure, the explosion might destabilize the entire network. The weapon was based on the same principles that made human railguns so effective, but scaled up to planetary destruction levels. The tungsten asteroid weighed several thousand tons and would strike its target at speeds approaching 10% of light velocity. The kinetic energy release would be equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons. As the combined fleet approached the Devourer home system long range, sensors detected massive enemy movement. The largest organic ships ever recorded began moving to intercept the approaching armada. These apex creatures had consumed the energy of entire star systems to reach their current size and power level. Captain Taiho called a final briefing for all ship commanders, both human and alien. The tactical display showed the enemy system with its hundreds of hostile vessels and pulsing organic factories. The mission parameters were simple, but extremely dangerous. They had to fight their way through the entire Devourer fleet to reach the central production facility. Fleet Admiral Sung-jin emphasized that this would likely be the most decisive battle in galactic history. If they failed here, the Devourers would continue expanding until they consumed every civilization in the galaxy. But if they succeeded in destroying the enemy's reproduction capability, the threat would be eliminated forever. The alien commanders who had once looked down on human military doctrine now listened carefully to every tactical instruction. The same species that had dismissed kinetic weapons as primitive now depended on them for survival. The irony was not lost on anyone present, but there was no time for reflection. Lieutenant Commander Ji-woo coordinated with alien tactical officers to ensure perfect timing for the assault. The plan required precise coordination between ships with vastly different capabilities and crew training. Any mistake could result in friendly fire incidents or leave critical targets undefended during the attack. Chief Engineer Young-ho ran final checks on all weapon systems across the human fleet. The railguns and mass drivers that had proven so effective against individual Devourer ships would now face their ultimate test against an entire enemy civilization. The tungsten rounds were loaded and ready for the largest battle in history. Enemy detected their approach while still hours away from the target system. Massive Devourer ships larger than any previously encountered began moving to intercept the Allied fleet. These creatures were clearly the apex of their species' beings. that had absorbed unimaginable amounts of energy to grow to such enormous size. Captain Tejo ordered the fleet to assume attack formation as they prepared for the final assault. The Iron Phoenix would lead the charge just as it had in every previous engagement against the Devourers. The ship that had started this war with a desperate defense would now finish it with a decisive offensive. The crew worked with practiced efficiency as they approached the most dangerous region of space any sentient being had ever entered. They were about to face an enemy that had the home field advantage along with numerical superiority and intimate knowledge of their own territory. But they also carried weapons that the Devourers still could not counter as the first enemy ships appeared on the tactical displays. Captain Tejo reflected on how far humanity had come in such a short time. They had begun this conflict as outcasts and primitives. Now they were leading the galaxy's greatest military coalition into the most important battle in recorded history. The Devourers had made one crucial mistake in their invasion of civilized space. They had assumed that all species would fight using energy weapons like the Council forces they had first encountered. But humans had taken a different path in their technological development, and that difference was about to save the galaxy fleet. Admiral Sung Jin gave the final order to advance as the combined armada moved toward the enemy home system. The largest battle in galactic history was about to begin, and humanity would prove once and for all that being different was not a weakness, but the key to ultimate victory. The battle for the Devourer home system lasted 18 hours and became the most decisive military engagement in recorded galactic history. Human kinetic weapons proved devastatingly effective against every type of enemy vessel from small organic fighters to massive capital ships that had grown to the size of small moons. The creature's ability to absorb and redirect energy was completely useless against solid projectiles. Captain Kim Tejo personally led the assault on the largest organic structure, a massive creature that appeared to be the central intelligence controlling the entire Devourer network. The Iron Phoenix and her sister ships concentrated their railgun fire on specific weak points identified by Lieutenant Commander Li Jiwu's tactical analysis, systematically destroying vital organs with precision tungsten strikes. The battle was unlike anything previously seen in galactic warfare. Human ships moved in perfect coordination, firing tungsten rounds that tore through organic hulls like paper, while alien vessels provided support and reconnaissance. The combined fleet worked as a unified force, despite containing species that had been enemies for centuries. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho's kinetic impactor proved to be the decisive weapon of the entire war. When the massive tungsten asteroid struck the central Devourer structure at near light speed, the explosion was visible from neighboring star systems. The shockwave destroyed dozens of smaller, organic facilities and sent the remaining enemy forces into complete chaos. The destruction of their central intelligence network caused a cascade failure throughout the Devourer fleet. Individual ships began dying as their connection to the collective mind was severed. The organic creatures had never developed individual intelligence, relying entirely on their shared consciousness for coordination and survival. Fleet Admiral Kang Sung-jin coordinated the mopping-up operations with ruthless military efficiency. The combined fleet systematically eliminated every remaining Devourer vessel and organic structure in the system, ensuring that the threat could never return or evolve new defenses. For the first time in galactic history, an entire invasive species had been completely eradicated. The aftermath of humanity's victory transformed galactic politics in ways that would last for generations. The same council members who had previously dismissed Earth as too primitive now competed desperately for human attention, and alliance species that had never acknowledged humanity's existence suddenly discovered urgent reasons to establish diplomatic relations. Captain Tejo found himself appointed as the first human Grand Admiral in the Galactic Council's military hierarchy, with the Iron Phoenix serving as his flagship for a new joint defense fleet. The ship that had started as humanity's desperate attempt to prove their worth was now the symbol of galactic military cooperation. Lieutenant Commander Li Jiwu became the Council's chief tactical advisor, responsible for training alien commanders in the principles of kinetic warfare. Her tactical doctrines were studied at military academies across the galaxy as species scrambled to understand how humans had succeeded where advanced civilizations had failed. Chief Engineer Choi Young-ho led the massive effort to retrofit the entire Galactic fleet with human kinetic weapons technology. The project would take decades to complete, but it represented a fundamental shift in how the galaxy approached military defense. Every major warship would carry tungsten rounds alongside traditional energy weapons. The victory celebrations on Earth lasted for weeks, as humanity finally received the recognition they had always deserved. News broadcasts showed parades in every major city, while government officials met with alien ambassadors who had come to negotiate formal alliances. The planet that had been ignored was now the center of galactic attention. But the real change was in how humanity viewed itself and its place among the stars. They had proven that being called primitive was not necessarily an insult, and that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most effective. Once the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had learned a valuable lesson about the dangers of technological arrogance. Years passed, and the galaxy settled into a new era of peace and cooperation with humanity at the center of galactic defense. When new threats emerged from unexplored regions of space, the first response was always the same call: the humans. Their willingness to think differently combined with their stubborn refusal to accept defeat had made them invaluable: the iron.